Welcome back to all the girlies, gays, and days out there. It is time for me to give you my Q4 of 2024 wrap up. I do want to be completely honest and say this is my second time recording this video because the first time I recorded this video, I only mentioned all the books that I read in December. And then when I sat down to edit that footage, I was like, wait a second. I think I read a lot more books than that, which is in fact correct because I read 31 books in Q4, which is October, November, December. And that is a lot of books. I think that is the highest number of books that I read in all of the quarters in 2024. And I want to be like the other girlies and hold up the physical copy of the book as we're discussing it and going through this wrap up. But unfortunately, I am feeling very, very lazy. And you know what? It's a lot of work to collect all of those books and put them in the order so that I don't have to be shuffling through. It takes so much. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be lazy. I'm not like the other girlies. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna be lazy. I'm gonna put the picture on the screen as we discuss these books. So we're gonna start off with my 1-star books. The first 1-star book I read against my will. It's Stuffed by the Weird Turkey by Tate McKirk. Now this is a book that was read aloud to me. This book was only 13 pages and it is a 1-star because it is as bad as the title does suggest. So this is a monster romance about this girl that gets a turkey, but the turkey is like a shapeshifter. So when the turkey shapeshifts into human form, it has the body of a man but the head of a turkey, and this is shifter weird turkey smut. It's a really bad book. The cover that you're seeing on the screen now, cursed, absolutely cursed. And then the next book I read was Catch a Sun by Miss Jennifer Hartman. And if you saw my worst books of 2024, then you know that this book is bad. Don't read it. This is a YA dark romance, and those two genres I now know don't belong together. It's about this girl and this guy who were best friends when they were kids, but then the girl's brother killed someone, and that was the dark part of the dark romance, and then she had to move away, and then they reunited as teenagers, and as teenagers they get into a relationship with each other, but then they had a really hard time communicating, and then there was a third act miscommunication that just had me shaking my head like, what? Moving on to the next book, which is A Ministry of Time by Kaylin Bradley. This book is 1-star because it is boring. Nothing happens in this book. This is supposed to be like a sci-fi time travel book, but let me tell you, not a single thing happens in this book. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me, it won the Goodreads Choice Award for sci-fi, even though this book is literally not sci-fi. I actually ended up DNFing this book, frankly, because it was so boring. Like I said before, not even the audio book narrator, who is the same person that does the voice acting for Caitlin and Ukraine, heart Caitlin, love Caitlin, could get me to finish this book. It was just, the book was not good. And the next book I gave 1-star is Chastely Bitten by Lexi Foss. This is a paranormal, modern fantasy smut erotica book. Humans have been subjected into slavery, and the vampires and the lycans, they rule. But then at the very beginning of this book, we have this character, her name is Juliet, and she's being sold away at like a slave or sex auction to this vampire who wants to kind of reframe her thinking about being a human and being a slave, because humans are supposed to be so obedient and so subservient to the vampires, but he wants to put humans back in charge for some reason. Like, if you were the leader in charge, why would you want to like give that power up to somebody else? I don't know, it wasn't making a lot of sense. And then the book was just pure smuttiness, and I was like, no thank you, no thank you. And then moving on to the next 1-star book, which is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I feel like I just didn't get it. I feel like maybe I got a different copy of this book than everybody else, because this was supposed to be a gothic fantasy story about this girl named Elspeth who has some magical powers, but she also has like a demon thingy living in her head speaking to her. It's kind of like giving Venom a little bit.
I am happy to eat, Mrs. Chen.
No, you cannot eat, Mrs. Chen.
But the whole premise of this book is that there are like 12 magic cards. I think it's 12 magic cards that needs to be collected. This book was literally just giving like Magic the Gathering or Pokemon. I wasn't getting it. This book also has a crazy high Goodreads score. I think it's like maybe like 4.39, I think it was the last time I checked, and I feel like I got a different copy than everybody else, because this book was giving I want to be fantasy, but I really am is YA. The characters were making so many dumb decisions that I was like, I'm not into it. This might be a book that I consider rereading again, because like I said, it had such a high Goodreads score that I was like, what am I missing? What am I not getting? And then moving on to the books that I gave 2 stars. The first one is Evocation by S.T. Gibson. I'm so sorry to Miss S.T. Gibson, because I love Diary of Blood and hot take, but I loved An Education Malice. I gave that 5 stars. So I was really excited to I'm so sorry. Oh, anyway, what was I saying? I was really excited to get to this book because I loved A Diary of Blood and I loved An Education Malice. And then when I read this book, I was kind of like, hey, what? I swear this must be the first novel that she had written, because it read like a debut novel. We were following this one guy and he is like a magic wizard. I don't know what to call him, but he has magic powers and he deals with like the dead. And then there's this couple that also has some like magical abilities, but he has like the main guy, at least, he has a curse placed on him, and then he goes to the couple to ask them to help him to remove this like familial curse that he has, but then turns into like a polyamory book. And I'm gonna be quite honest, not a lot of things happen in this book. I know this is like a part 1 of a series that S.D. Gibson plans on writing, but I don't think I'm continuing. I'm so sorry to miss S.D. Gibson, but like this book was not it. So sorry. Moving on. And the next book I gave 2 stars was An Emperor in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is a YA novel. This book has been out for a really, really long time, and it is a lot of people's like favorite books. But what we're following one character. I don't remember her name. You'll find that to be a trend in this video, but her brother gets sent to prison, and then we're following this guy. I think they're called Masks, and he is like a student at like this war college, and he's like aiding the Empire, but he actually hates the Empire and is trying to figure a way to like leave or take them down. So we have the main girl who then starts to work at this like war college or like war school, and they meet up and they somehow decide to like take down the Empire. I'm so sorry, the way that this book fell out of my mind the second that I finished reading it, because it was not memorable. I mean, maybe at the time that this book was released it was doing something new in YA, but at the time I was reading it in 2024, it just felt like it had been done before, like I've already seen it before. This was just not memorable to me, and like I said, I'm so sorry because I know a lot of people like this book, but it didn't hit for me. And then the next book was The Family Game by Catherine Steadman, and this is a psychological thriller, I guess you could say, about this woman. Her name's Harriet, who marries into a wealthy like generational family, but then she's given tapes by the father of this family basically admitting to a bunch of murders, and she's trying to figure out like, did these murders actually happen? But also the family is very toxic. I'm sorry, when I read a book about rich people, I'm like, I couldn't care less. You brought this upon yourself. And also it had such a stereotypical ending, because I was like, oh my god, who did it? And then when you find out who did it, you're like, fuck. And then moving on to my 3-star books. So the first one is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. I frankly don't know why I picked up this book. I think I was planning on doing like a plot summary, like how I did a plot summary for The Pretties, because I do believe that this book particularly is going to be adapted into either a movie or a mini TV show on HBO at some point in 2025. It's supposed to be released, and I wanted to do a plot summary, but then as I was reading the book, I was like, I don't understand what the fuck is happening, because George R.R. Martin, he does this thing where he will name drop a whole bunch of people, but then not say how these people are related or connected to the story whatsoever. So the entire time I was reading this book, I was like, I need a family tree. I don't know who's related to who, what's going on. It was like a 3-part novella that's like binded up into this one book. So the first novella, completely understood, got it, understood what was going on there. But then the second 2, I was like, I don't know what's going on. That's why I got a 3-star, but I do think it was written really well. And the next book I read was Paladin's Hope by T. Kingfisher, and this is the 3rd book in the Saint of Steel series. So in the Saint of Steel series, we're following paladins who are in this particular like faith or group who their god has died or pretty much like left them, and so the paladins are trying to like figure out what to do now that their god has left them. And I don't want to get too much into the book because it is the 3rd book in a series, but just to let you know, T. Kingfisher is one of my all-time favorite authors. I love this book. I only have 1 book in the series left to read. I do want to read that book pretty soon. If you like T. Kingfisher's book, this is a good fantasy book to pick up. And the next book I read was Role Playing by Kathy Yardley. I picked this book up particularly because we're following 2 older characters, and this is a romance book, and I just wanted to read a book where the main girl and the guy are older and we don't have to deal with like immaturity. Kind of looking at you, Elsie Silver, on this front. And I really, really like this book. It was so refreshing to read about characters who are a bit older, more mature, or their kids, or the girl has a kid who is like in college, they have their lives settled, they have everything figured out. But what this novel is really mainly following, so the girl, she's kind of a little bit agoraphobic and she doesn't like to leave her house, and then the guy, he is like a retired nurse or I think like that, something like that, and they both meet because they're in this online gaming group, and she thinks that he is like in his 20s and he thinks she is like 80, but they're both like in their 40s or 50s, and then once they figure it out that they are around the same age, they're like, ooh, I Think I Like You. It was so refreshing to read a romance novel about two older characters. I really recommend this one, even though I gave it 3 stars. I still think it's good. And then the next book I read was Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. I am so sorry to Miss Leigh Bardugo because I remember when I read this book for the first time, it was so hyped up. I think I didn't give it that high of a rating. Maybe I gave it like 3 or 4 stars, but then I decided to reread again because I got Crooked Kingdom. I was like, let's give it a try. Let's reread Six of Crows so that I can finally read Crooked Kingdom. And when I tell you, not a single thing in Six of Crows stuck up here when I reread it. It was going in one ear, out and out the other. I think I need to reread this again for like a 3rd time because I do want to read Crooked Kingdom. I think that's the name of that book. But I have nothing else to say about Six of Crows. You all know what this book is about. And then the next book I read is Slow Dance by Miss Rainbow Rowell. And if you love Slow Dance and you put it on your top books of 2024, I'm so sorry to say that I gave this 3 stars. I desperately want to be like the other girlies and living for the hype and loving what everybody else loves. But the thing is with this book is that it is a second chance romance book, and I went into this book with an open heart and an open mind because it was Miss Rainbow Rowell, and I love Rainbow Rowell. We're following Shiloh, who's the girl, and Carrie, who is the guy, and they have been in love with each other since high school, but then they had a really dumb miscommunication when they were like in college and they didn't speak for years, but now that they're adults, they're trying to get together. I feel like I read a different copy of this book than everybody else because when I finished it, I was like, it's just fine. It was fine. Like, I don't hate it. I don't love it. It was fine. I'm so sorry. It's scandalous blasphemy in the booktube community, but that's what I have to say about this book. And then the next book I read is Black Sheep by Bryn Weaver, and there's a second author for this. I'm not gonna remember her name, but this was a 3-star book because this is a dark romance, good for her type of book where the main girl, she is getting her PhD or she's getting some kind of college degree, and the guy is a professor, and she is out for revenge to kill off someone who has wronged her in the past. And again, this book was just fine. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I mean, the one thing that bothered me about this book was the BDSM, because whenever they would have sex, I was like, I'm not into this. Love it if you are, but it wasn't for me. It just felt so derivative of Mindfolk, like it was not trying to do anything special. I mean, it was fine. Also, I had to read this book with my eyeballs because there is no audiobook for this book, so it has wronged me in that sense. But if you want a good for her, I recommend picking up this one because like I said, it was just fine. And then the next book I read was Girl Forgotten by Karen Slaughter, and this is a detective mystery book, and that is literally all I remember about this book. I just remember that the detective, her name was Andrea, and it was flashing in the past and into the 4 like dual timelines because there's this girl who was murdered. I want to say maybe it was like in the 70s or 80s that Andrea is now trying to like solve this cult case, and she is related to who we think the perpetrator is. I gave this book 3 stars because it just felt very derivative of things that you would see in any kind of thriller book. Like, again, this wasn't trying to do anything special, and so I was just kind of surprised at how basic it was. I didn't hate it. I didn't like it. It was fine. Now, the next book I gave 3 stars, and this one pains me to have given it 3 stars, is Alloy of Law by Mr. Brandon Sanderson. So this is the 4th book in the Mistborn series. Like, this is the part 2 of the Mistborn series, and the part 2 flashes forward a few centuries after the events of part 1, and at this point we're following, I don't remember their names, but he is a detective, but he's like, I'm done with my detective ways because my noble family actually needs me now, and royal women have gone missing, so he has to go back to his detective ways and partner up with his former partner when he was a detective to solve why these women are going missing. There were some twists and turns that I did not see coming. I did like it, but it just felt not the same like Mistborn. It felt like everything that I loved about Mistborn kind of was like stripped away, also because it's flash forward in a few centuries. It's more modernized, and I'm like, what about my nice fantasy world? You introduce all this technology. I don't know if I could get down with that. You know what it kind of felt like? It felt like Mistborn was Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then it felt like this part 2, Isle of Lie, was The Legend of Korra, where like everything got updated and they all of a sudden had technology, and then you're kind of like, oh my god, what happened? That's what it felt like reading this book. So the next book I read was To Ravish a Rogue by Siam Nakasa. Also, let me interrupt before I get into this book by saying, yes, I am talking really fast because, like I said, I read 31 books, so I gotta speed it up. We gotta get going here. So To Ravish a Rogue, this is a monster romance kind of fantasy book where we're following a main character, Charlotte, and she is some type of monster. We're not being told what it is at the very beginning, but she needs to get back to Atlantis because apparently her sister has been acting a mess and she needs to get to Atlantis to set things straight, but she needs to book passage on a ship. So what she does is she sneaks onto a ship pretending to be a boy, and it's like, hey, Sir Captain, I'm a boy, I'm here to help, will you hire me? And the captain pegs her right away as a woman, but he's like, I'm intrigued, why is this woman hiding as a boy? So he's like, yes, you can be my cabin boy. And then they get into a little lusty romance, but what we find out is that the captain, he is a sea dragon, and then we find out that the girl is some type of monster. And let me tell you, this book is very explicit, but you know what, it's a silly goofy time. I really liked it. I was going into this book expecting to hate it, but you know what, I enjoyed it. It's 3 stars. It was a fun time. And then the next book I read was The Shuddering, and this is a horror book about a set of 4 or 5 really privileged white people who decide to go on a vacation in Colorado in the winter, and then monsters start picking them off one by one, and not a single person in this book was likable. So when the monster started getting them, I was like, get it, monster, get it, get it. Now moving on to my 4-star book. The first 4-star book that I read here was Off to the Races by Elsie Silver. I think this is the first book in her Gold Rush Ranch series. I think that's what it's called. Once again, I don't remember the main characters' names in this book, but that is to say, this is a typical like traditional romance book. But I think the Gold Rush is dealing with like billionaires. So we have the guy, he owns a ranch that is starting to go a little bit defunct, financially in trouble, and then we have the girl who is like a horse trainer, and he has one very specific, like I guess well-bred horse that he needs the girl to like train up and then race in races. This is an enemies to lovers type story, and it's very typical of Elsie Silver. So for me at this point, if you've read one Elsie Silver book, you've read them all. But for some reason, I keep buying them when I'm at Target. And then the next book I read was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. And this is a thriller book, but I really think it should be a horror because the way that there are some really horrific things that are written in this book that is so graphic, it will never leave my mind. But we're following one girl who is very rich. She's married to her wealthy husband, and they are attacked at the very beginning of the book, and then her husband is killed off. But then the girl also has a sister, I think it is, who is not very wealthy. The sister has had like some drug problems, mental health problems, what have you, and then their lives get turned topsy-turvy when this one event happens, and it's kind of like a high race to the finish. I was loving this book right up until the very end when the who did it or what's going on reveal. It was very typical of thriller books. Now it's kind of like, interesting. Karen Slaughter, I thought you were a bit more creative in this, but okay. And the next book I read was Radiance by Grace Draven. Now this is a romantasy book, and Grace Draven does romantasy very well. So we have the guy, and he's like a species where they're like gray, they have claws, and then we're following a human girl, and the guy and the girl both agree that their species are so ugly, but these two find a mutual understanding, which then develops into a romance. This is part 1, or the first book in a series. If you want to read a romance about 2 people that really care for each other, they weren't enemies to begin with, they were more like acquaintances, but then they fall in love, this one is for you because these guys are both very caring of each other, and I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. And then the next 4-star book I read was Two for Tea, Welcome to Azante by Sam Nakasa. Sam Nakasa has become one of those authors to me that when I am in a silly goofy mood, I will pick up one of their books. Two for Tea was such a welcome surprise to me because we are following this one girl. She is kind of like a failed witch. Her mom doesn't really like her, and she thinks that she's a failure. Also, her dad has just recently passed away, so she is suffering from depression. But this is a fantasy world, I guess you could say, because like I mentioned, she's a witch, but then there are other creatures in this world like familiars or cats that can talk to you. There is a smoke monster. This book was really, really short. I think it was a little over 200 pages, but what I really liked about this book is that it was exploring grief through a fantasy lens. This book was so sweet and so wholesome, of all the people and her neighbors trying to help her go through this depression. And even at one point she goes to see that like their version of like a magical doctor and takes some medication for her depression. There's also kind of like a slight romance, I guess you could say, in this book between her and like a little shadow demon. Yeah, she kind of does fuck a shadow in this book. I did like the way the smut was done in this book. I was into it. I'm not gonna lie, I was into it. And then the next 4-star book I read was Among Thieves by MJ Kuhn. This was such a happy surprise to me because I was not expecting to enjoy this book, but I really, really loved it. And this is one of the books that I read in December. I think I will be continuing on the series because this is following a group, I think it's like 6 or maybe 5 people who are a band of thieves. They work for this one thief lord guy. His name is, I think, Cal. And at the very beginning of this book, there is this one mission or this heist they plan on going on to steal this very important thing. And it is a fantasy book set in what I could understand is kind of like the ye olde times. Just think of Six of Crows, but done a little bit better. And the characters are older. The first third of this book was very slow. And at some points, it introduced the characters too fast. And I was just a little bit confused as to who is who. But eventually I got there and understood what was happening. And then once they got to where they needed to go in order to pull off this heist, I was like, yes, I'm into it. What I really, really liked about this book is that there were 2 characters. Her name is Raya and the other one is Evelyn, who reminded me so much of the dynamic between Kate and Vi in Arcane.
You're hot, Cupcake. You gonna help me out, Cupcake?
Stop calling me that. My name is Caitlin.
But you're so sweet. Like a cupcake. It's been real, Cupcake. Thanks for everything. Do yourself a favor, Cupcake. Go back to that big, shiny house of yours and just forget me.
I love me a good sapphic romance, and I could just tell it was budding in this book, but in book 2 I feel like it'll be there, which is why I want to continue on with book 2. Somebody please just drop a hint in the comments and let me know if I'm making this romance up in my head or if this is like a legit thing that we're gonna get in book 2. And the next 4-star book is Blood Over Brighthaven by M.L. Wong. This book has been so hyped up. A lot of people love this book. So I was wary going into it because immediately I'm like, something's really hyped up. I feel like I'm about to get burned, but I'm surprised to say that I really like this book. We are following Siona, and she lives in this town called Brighthaven. This is a fantasy book using rune magic, and she is the first woman to get accepted into like magedom in this world. And then we're following a different guy, and he has come to Brighthaven because there's this thing called the Blight that outside the city of Brighthaven is killing off animals, people, all the plants. So he makes it to Brighthaven and he gets a job as a janitor. And because Siona is the first woman to become a mage in Brighthaven, all the men treat her like shit, and she gets paired up with the guy to be her like assistant, but his like job is a janitor. But she's like, I'm not going to take this as slight, I'm going to rise above it. I was totally 100% into this book because the first half of this book, it was very much giving Arcane. I'm so sorry to have to continue to mention Arcane, but it is my favorite show of all time, and I'm desperately searching for a book that makes me feel the way that Arcane makes me feel. This Blood Over Brighthaven got really close, but then there was this thing that happened like halfway throughout the book where it gave you a plot twist that I didn't see coming because I didn't want that to happen particularly, but I understood where ML Wong was going with it, and there was like even more reveals after that continued to happen, and I was like, oh my god, twists and turns all over the place. I really enjoyed this book. I think this is one that a lot of people can take something out of or even enjoy or really like this book. After reading this one, I'm curious as to what sort of Kaigen is about, because that's another ML Wong book that's really hyped up, and I'm like, maybe I should pick that up, but again, I'm scared. And the next book I gave 4 stars was City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. I'm not gonna go too much into this book because it has been out for a while, and I feel like a lot of people know what this book is about. This is another like a YA fantasy book kind of set in Egypt or in that particular area. The first half of this book I really enjoyed because we're just following Nair and Dara as they truck through the desert. It's very much giving like a traveling story while they're continued to be like attacked by the baddies, and I was there. I was like, yes, give this to me. But then once they got to the City of Brass and they met the king and the prince, it did devolve into like your typical YA fantasy of that time, where she then starts to develop a little bit of romance with the prince, and then you're like, oh my god, what's happening? It turned into like a love triangle a bit, and that's where the story kind of lost me, because I was like, this is not what I wanted out of this book. I was really hoping this book was going to do something different. There was a bit of a plot twist at the end of the book that I might continue reading the series because I kind of want to know what happened, but at the same time I'm like, this book has been out for a while that I could just look up what happened. So I don't know if I'm going to continue on with this one. We shall see. And then the next book I read was Someone You Could Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. I'm so surprised that this book was written by a man because the disability representation was done really well in this book. The lesbian lovers was done so well in this book. Also, there was asexual representation in this book that I was like, how did a man write this? So we're following Shasheshan, and she is kind of like this amorphous blob monster, and at the very beginning of the book she is in her hibernation, but then 2 guys decide to interrupt that hibernation, and Shasheshan's like, that's rude as fuck. And she does come after them and kill one of them. But then she wanders into town because one of the guys did manage to hurt her. And she learns that the town is searching to kill her because apparently the rumor has it is that Secession placed a curse on the royal family. And Secession's like, I did no such thing. So because she's injured, she has to flee. And then she is taken in by this wonderful woman named Homily, who nurses her back to health. But what's so funny about this book is Secession is not familiar with like human customs. So at the beginning of the book, when she meets Homily, she's like, I think I love Homily. I think I want to lay my eggs in her. When in reality, that would kill Homily. This book is just so wonderful. I think that if you like any of T. Kingfisher's fantasy books, then you would enjoy this book. It feels like John Wiswell and T. Kingfisher could be friends. And this is a debut novel by John Wiswell. And like I said, I am so surprised that a man wrote this book. Now moving on to the books that I gave 5 stars. The first one is A Hero of Ages by Mr. Brandon Sanderson. And this is the last book in the first part of the Mistborn series. And this book had me emotionally distraught because there were a lot of twists and turns that happened in this book that I was like, was it too much to ask for Mr. Brandon Sanderson to give us a happy ending to the series? Probably, because it doesn't seem like that's usually his ways about writing the endings. But after finishing this first part of the Mistborn series, like I said, I'm reading the second part of the Mistborn series, but then I also want to pick up The Way of Kings because that is a book series that's very, very hyped up. I think I have desensitized, or I guess learned the way that Mr. Brandon Sanderson writes his books and his fantasy world building, that I'm like ready to get into The Way of Kings, where I'm pretty sure the world building will break my mind, but I'm in it. I want to try. Now the next book that I gave 5 stars, and I'm so ashamed that I gave this book 5 stars because the author is problematic, and that book is Dinner for Vampires by Bethany Joy Lenz. I really, really wanted to hate this book, but unfortunately I have to say that it was a good book. So this is following Bethany Joy Lenz's time when she was in that cult, and then also her time on One Tree Hill. And the entire time I was reading this book, I was like, what the fuck, girly? The narration done by her is really, really well done. And then she does have some of the One Tree Hill cast members, like the guy that played Dan and then the guy that played Nathan, and also Chad Michael Murray, narrate some part of the book when they like cropped into the story. Like I said, I did not want to like this book, but unfortunately I did. I did get this book through my library because I did not want to financially support Bethany Joy Lenz. If you know why she's problematic, then you know I'm not going to say it here. And the next book I gave 5 star was The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare. I'm so surprised by this book because I had always put Tessa Dare off because the covers of her book were just giving not trying that hard. But The Duchess Deal is following Emma, and she is a seamstress, and she shows up on Duke Ashbury's doorstep wearing a wedding dress, basically telling him, hey, you need to pay me because I made this wedding dress for your bride and I never got paid. And if I don't get paid, I'm going to be living out in the street. And Ashbury's like, yeah, we are no longer engaged. But then a light bulb goes off into his head because he's like, I need an heir or else my family line is done. And there's this woman wearing a wedding dress right in front of me, and I think that she will do. So he asks her to marry him. And at first she's like, I don't know you like that. But then she starts thinking that she has a friend who is pregnant and who's not married, and this friend needs somewhere to go and give birth to a baby where no one in polite society will know that she's pregnant. And she figures that she can set her friend up in one of Ashbury's estates. So they enter into this marriage of convenience where they decide that, okay, yeah, we'll get married, but we're gonna boink, but there's no feelings involved. We're just gonna try to have a kid together. But then throughout the way, they end up falling in love, and they have this mutual respect for each other that I really, really loved. I do think that Tessa Dare just be writing Regency romance in a way that I have not seen before. Like, the Tessa Dare Regency romance books is what Bridgerton series wish it could be. Oh my god, we're down to the wire. I'm actually really, really tired of talking at this point, but we only have 2 books left to go. So the next book I gave 5 stars was Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, and this is the 3rd book in her Fae series. So we're following Jude, and she's a human, and then she has a twin sister named Taryn, and then a half sister named Vivi, and they're all whisked away to the land of fairy when they were very, very young. And because she's human, the fairy people do not treat her well because they're like, humans, they're so simple, they're so dumb. But Jude has aspirations because she, even though she's being treated really horribly by all the fairies, she wants to be accepted into their world. But then she also meets the prince of this fairy world. His name is Carden, who is so mean to her, but it is an enemies to lovers romance. And what I love about the series is that it's go, 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 go from page 1. And then the last book I gave 5 stars is Mayfly by C.J. Lead. I am so surprised by this book because this is a horror book, and I don't typically tend to enjoy horror, especially because this is a body horror book, that I was like, let's give it a try, but I don't think that I'm gonna like it. And I am so wrong. So we're following Maeve, and she plays Princess Elsa at Disneyland, but the book never says the word Elsa or Disneyland. I think because the author didn't want to get sued by Disney. And Maeve is an unhinged lady. At the very beginning of the book, she is masturbating to some BDSM porn while also watching a documentary about two animals hunting, and then also trying to destroy this woman's life on the internet. So Maeve is into some very, very interesting things. And then she has a best friend, I think her name is Kate, whose brother she gets into a little bit of a romance with. And then we're also following Maeve's grandmother, who is comatose, very sick, and being taken care in hospice at her home. But throughout the book, Maeve is doing some very unhinged things by killing people. This is not good for her because the people that Maeve are killing don't deserve it. But what really set this book to giving it 5 stars was that ending. I think it was like the last 20 pages where Maeve just flies off the handle, and then when she realizes what she did, she was like, the regrets. I just think this book was done so well, and I'm so excited to read more of CJ Lee's books. But anyway, those are all of the 31 books that I read in Q4. This video is probably really, really long, and my voice is starting to hurt me now. Also, I'm very hungry, so I think it's time for me to get some food. If you liked this video, please give it a like, please subscribe, please comment below, and I will see you guys in another video next week. Bye!